There's a radio signal broadcasting from a place that shouldn't exist anymore. It plays the same song on an endless loop. A woman's voice promising that you can begin again, that the hardest part is letting go. The transmission has been running for over 200 years, calling out across the Mojave wasteland, and everyone who follows it to its source discovers the same truth. The Sierra Madre doesn't want you to escape. It wants you to stay, forever. This is not a story about treasure, though there's treasure. This is not a story about survival, though survival becomes impossible. This is a story about a building that learned how to hate, about technology designed to protect that became a prison, about love that curdled into obsession, and about four people who walked into a trap that had been waiting since before the bombs fell. The Sierra Madre Casino is a wound in the desert that never healed. It's a place where the pre-war world died screaming, where the cloud still churns through streets that should be empty, where ghost people shamble through routines they no longer remember, and where every promise of salvation is actually an invitation to die slowly, choking on toxic air while your collar beeps its final countdown. Over the next several hours, we're going to descend into that wound. We'll trace the rot back to its source. Frederick Sinclair, a man who tried to build a fortress for love and created a mausoleum instead. We'll follow Vera Keyes, the starlet who was dying long before the Sierra Madre killed her. We'll meet Dean Domino, whose vanity survived 2 centuries of living death just to prove he was better than a dead man. We'll track Christine Royce, the assassin who let revenge strip away everything human until only the mission remained. And we'll confront Father Elijah, the elder who looked at the Sierra Madre's horror and saw the future. By the end, you'll understand why dead money isn't really about the gold bars in the vault. It's about the weight around your neck, literal and metaphorical, and whether you can walk away before that weight drags you down forever. If something in this deep dive resonates, leave a comment and tell me what moment stuck with you, whether it was a tiny detail, a connection you hadn't seen before, or a line that just felt a little too real. While you're there, drop a suggestion for where we should go next. The strangest, most unsettling rabbit holes on this channel have started with your ideas. So now get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's begin. The central truth of the Sierra Madre is simple. It doesn't matter how strong you are, how clever, or how careful. The moment you decide you deserve what's inside, you've already lost. Chapter 1. The Building That Learned to Hate. Before it was a tomb, before it was a trap, before it learned to strangle everyone who entered, the Sierra Madre was supposed to be an act of love. That should have been a warning. Nothing built from obsession ever ends well. But Frederick Sinclair was too deep in his own delusion to see the shape of what he was creating. Sinclair was a businessman in the years before the Great War, the kind who moved through rooms full of money and power, like a ghost, present but never quite seen. He built supply chains, infrastructure, the invisible machinery that kept civilization running while it raced toward annihilation. He was successful in every quantifiable way, and completely hollow because of it. Then Vera Keyes walked into his life, and hollowness found something to fill itself with. Vera was a starlet, not the transcendent kind that burns bright and changes culture, but the tragic kind that the industry chews up and spits out. She had a haunting voice, a fragile beauty that cameras loved, and the terminal awareness that none of it would last. She performed in romantic dramas where she played women who were always saved at the last moment, always caught before they fell. Off-screen, no one was catching her. Sinclair fell in love the way drowning men grab onto anchors, desperately, without considering whether the thing they're clutching will save them or drag them deeper. He wanted to give her safety, protection, a place where the world's cruelty couldn't reach her, where the pressures of fame would dissolve, where she could finally stop performing and just exist. It was romantic, in theory. In practice, it was a rich man deciding that his money could solve the fundamental unsolvability of another person's pain. So he built the Sierra Madre. The location he chose was remote, nestled in the mountains, far from population centers, accessible only through carefully controlled routes. The design was Art Deco grandeur mixed with cutting edge technology, a casino and resort where old world elegance would meet new world innovation. Sinclair partnered with Big MT, the think tank research facility that specialized in pushing science past the point where ethics would have made it stop. That partnership should have been the second warning. Big MT didn't do anything for altruistic reasons. They collected data. They ran experiments. They treated human suffering as a valuable resource to be mined and studied. When Sinclair approached them for security systems, environmental technology, and hologram entertainment, they agreed immediately. Not because they wanted to help, but because the Sierra Madre would become the perfect laboratory. Construction began in 2074. Workers arrived to build what they thought would be an extraordinary resort. They constructed the villa first, residential buildings surrounding the casino, housing for staff and performers, infrastructure to support the eventual flood of wealthy guests. The buildings were beautiful in that specific pre-war way, all clean lines and optimistic design, the architecture of people who genuinely believed the future would be better than the past. The casino itself rose like a cathedral to excess. Copper filigree caught the light. Neon signs promised luxury. The interior was designed to disorient, winding corridors, deliberate dead ends, spaces that felt larger than their physical dimensions. Casinos are always built as mazes to keep gamblers inside and spending. But the Sierra Madre's design had an additional purpose. It was a controlled environment where every variable could be monitored. Because Big MT wasn't just providing technology, they were running experiments. The construction workers began to notice oddities, vending machines that seemed unnecessarily complex, requiring special chips as currency, environmental systems that filtered air with paranoid thoroughness, as if preparing for contamination that didn't exist yet, security measures that went beyond preventing theft into the territory of preventing escape. Some workers raised concerns. Those concerns were noted in reports that Sinclair never saw, filed by Big MT researchers who categorized dissent as useful data about psychological resistance to environmental conditioning. The hazmat suits arrived in 2076, presented as standard safety equipment for working with experimental technology and environmental systems. The workers were told that some areas might have chemical exposure, that the suits were precautionary, that wearing them during certain shifts was mandatory but temporary. The suits were uncomfortable, bulky. The helmets restricted vision. The material didn't breathe properly, turning the interior into a humid, claustrophobic environment where your own breath became your enemy. Workers complained. The complaints were documented. No changes were made. What the workers didn't know was that Big MT had designed those suits to fail in very specific ways. The seals would deteriorate under exposure to certain compounds. The filtration would become inadequate under prolonged use. The suits would protect just enough to keep someone alive while slowly poisoning them, stretching death out over weeks or months instead of minutes. Because Big MT wanted to study what happened when you trapped someone in a prison they wore on their own body. The cloud came later. During construction, it existed only in laboratories and theoretical models. Big MT was developing it as a defensive weapon, a corrosive gas that would cling to architecture and fill spaces, making entire areas uninhabitable to enemies while remaining controllable by those who had the right protective technology. The theory was that you could seal off military installations, bunkers, or valuable locations with the cloud, creating perimeters that were impassable without killing the infrastructure inside. The reality was that the cloud was semi-sentient in ways that terrified even the scientists developing it. It didn't just corrode metal and choke lungs. It learned, it adapted, it spread through ventilation systems and seeped through cracks that shouldn't have been permeable. Big MT tested the cloud in isolated sections of the villa, in spaces workers were told were restricted due to construction hazards. Some workers ignored the restrictions. Some of those workers were never seen again. The incidents were logged as industrial accidents. The data was valuable. Sinclair was obsessed with his vault, the heart of the Sierra Madre, buried deep beneath the casino. He designed it as the ultimate treasure room, but also as a symbol. Everything precious would be locked inside. Everything worth protecting would be kept safe behind layers of security so sophisticated that even nuclear war couldn't breach them. The vault's locking mechanism was keyed to Vera's voice. Literally, her vocal pattern would be the key. Sinclair commissioned recordings of her speaking specific phrases, had them analyzed and digitized, programmed the system so that only Vera could open the final door. It was romantic in a way that crossed into something disturbing. He was making her voice into a literal instrument of access, turning her identity into a tool for his security system. Vera never questioned why he needed her voice recorded so extensively, or if she did, she never objected loud enough for it to matter. The holograms were the Sierra Madre's crown jewel of technology. Big MT had developed hard light projections, holograms solid enough to interact with physical space, intelligent enough to respond to their environment. They would serve as entertainers, security, and staff, tireless and perfect. But the holograms had a problem. They couldn't distinguish between threats and inconveniences. Their programming was binary, authorized or unauthorized, permitted or forbidden. A guest who wandered into a restricted area might receive a polite warning. A worker who broke a rule might be vaporized where they stood. The security holograms killed their first person in 2076 during testing. A technician crossed an invisible boundary while calibrating sensors. The hologram didn't hesitate. It fired a beam that disintegrated flesh and fused bone, leaving a charred skeleton that collapsed, in a position that suggested the victim hadn't even had time to scream. Big MT logged the incident as a successful demonstration of the security system's responsiveness. The technician's family was told there had been an industrial accident and was compensated generously under agreements that included non-disclosure clauses. By 2077, the Sierra Madre was nearly complete. The casino gleamed, the villa was populated, the vault was sealed and waiting. Everything was ready for the grand opening. The moment when Sinclair would present his impossible achievement to the world, and more importantly, to Vera. Except Vera was dying. She'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness months earlier, the kind that came with timelines and certainties, where doctors stopped offering hope and started offering comfort. She was managing the pain with Med-X and Stimpaks, taking larger doses as the disease progressed, hiding the addiction along with the illness because her entire career depended on the illusion of vitality. Dean Domino knew. He'd introduced Sinclair to Vera deliberately, and while Sinclair built his fortress, Dean and Vera continued their affair behind his back. Dean was a stage magician and lounge singer, a man whose talent was real but whose ego was larger. He'd spent his career being almost famous, almost successful, always one break away from the recognition he believed he deserved. He recognized Vera's deterioration immediately. Performers learn to spot weakness in each other. It's survival instinct in an industry that devours anyone who stumbles. Dean approached Vera not with sympathy, but with opportunity. He knew about Sinclair's vault. He knew about the treasure. He had a plan to rob it, but he needed Vera's voice to open the final door. Dean's blackmail was calculated and cruel. He'd discovered her Med-X usage, medication she needed for the pain of her terminal illness, and threatened to expose her as an addict. The accusation would have destroyed her career regardless of the medical truth. They would rob the vault together, Dean insisted. She would use her voice to open it, and if she refused, he would ruin everything she had left. Vera agreed because she was trapped, dying, desperate, and cornered by someone who'd recognized her vulnerability and weaponized it. It didn't matter that the hand would pull her under. She was going under anyway. Sinclair began to suspect something was wrong in the final months before the planned opening. Vera was distant. Dean was too familiar. There were conversations that stopped when Sinclair entered rooms, glances that carried weight. His security staff reported that Dean had been accessing areas he shouldn't, asking questions about systems that didn't concern entertainers. Sinclair had spent his entire life learning to recognize betrayal. Business had taught him that everyone had a price, that loyalty lasted only as long as self-interest aligned. He'd believed Vera was different. The discovery that she wasn't shattered something fundamental in his psychology. He didn't confront her. Instead, he did what powerful men do when they discover betrayal. He began planning revenge. The trap he designed was elegant and horrible. He would let them attempt the robbery, let them penetrate the security, navigate the casino, reach the vault, let Vera open the door with her voice, and then the systems he'd built would seal them inside, not to kill them immediately, but to trap them in the paradise he'd built, surrounded by wealth they couldn't spend, locked in luxury that would become their tomb. But something in Sinclair couldn't commit fully to the cruelty. He loved her, still, despite the betrayal, despite everything. So he returned to the vault and deleted the trap sequence meant for Vera. He left messages explaining that he knew, that he forgave her, that she should leave and survive. Then he went down into the systems beneath the casino to manually disable the remaining traps, trying to dismantle the revenge mechanism his hurt and rage had built. He never came back up. A leak in the cloud containment system, possibly sabotaged by big MT personnel conducting unauthorized tests, possibly simple mechanical failure, released the gas into the maintenance tunnels. Sinclair, working alone in the depths of his creation, breathed it in. The cloud filled his lungs, corrosive and inescapable. He died in the dark beneath the building he'd constructed as a monument to love, surrounded by security systems that hadn't protected him and machinery that had become his executioner. His body was found decades later by scavengers, still slumped against the terminal where he'd been trying to save the woman who'd betrayed him. The bombs fell on October 23, 2077. The Sierra Madre's grand opening had been scheduled for that same month. The date was never reached. When nuclear fire washed across the world, the Sierra Madre's automated systems interpreted it as an attack. The lockdown protocols engaged. The casino sealed itself. The villa locked down. The holograms activated their combat protocols. And the cloud, which had been contained in laboratories and isolated test sites, began to spread. The villa became a gas chamber. Workers and residents who'd been preparing for the grand opening found themselves trapped in buildings that were filling with toxic rust-colored mist. The hazmat suits they'd worn during construction were pulled from storage. Some people got them on in time, some didn't. Those who sealed themselves inside the suits discovered that protection was temporary. The cloud crept through failing seals, filtered slowly through degrading masks. They didn't die quickly. That would have been mercy. The cloud changed them, preserved them in ways that biology shouldn't have allowed. Their bodies stopped functioning in normal ways. Breathing became optional. Death became incomplete. They shambled through the villa in their hazmat suits, trapped inside their own protection, still technically alive but no longer human in any meaningful sense. The ghost people were born. They wandered the villa in silence, moving with that distinctive hunched, twitching gait that suggested bodies no longer under conscious control. They attacked anything that moved, driven by instincts that might have been hunger or territoriality or simply the final misfiring of nervous systems that couldn't die. You could shoot them, stab them, blow them apart. It didn't matter. Unless you destroyed the limbs or removed the head, they would get back up. The cloud had made them nearly unkillable, cursing them with a half-life that would stretch across centuries. Inside the casino, Vera Keyes locked herself in her suite. She had the drugs that kept the pain manageable, the terminal that played her own songs back to her, and the growing certainty that she was in a tomb. Sinclair's forgiveness messages appeared on her terminal, proof that he'd known about the betrayal, that he'd tried to save her anyway, that his love had survived even her treachery. The knowledge destroyed her more thoroughly than the cloud could have. She'd betrayed the one person who genuinely cared whether she lived or died. She'd traded his devotion for Dean's manipulation, and now she was trapped in the monument Sinclair had built for her, unable to escape, slowly dying from the illness and the guilt. She recorded a final message. Then she took all the med-X she had left and drifted into unconsciousness, while her own voice sang about beginning again through the speakers Sinclair had installed, so she'd always be surrounded by music. Her body was found centuries later in the executive suite, still lying on the bed where she'd chosen to end it, surrounded by empty chem containers and the recordings that would eventually become the radio beacon drawing others to their doom. Dean Domino survived. That was his curse. He'd been in the casino when the lockdown happened, had found a maintenance area where the cloud hadn't penetrated fully. He had supplies. He had intelligence. He had enough understanding of the systems to keep himself alive through the initial chaos. And he had the absolute certainty that he was better than Sinclair, smarter than the security systems, capable of eventually finding a way to crack the vault and claim the prize. He'd been wrong about the timeline. Instead of days or weeks, it took 200 years. Dean remained in the Sierra Madre, sustained by the cloud's strange preservation effects, kept alive by the same toxic gas that had created the ghost people. He wasn't transformed like them. He'd avoided enough exposure to retain his humanity, but he wasn't unchanged either. His body stopped aging normally. His mind stayed sharp even as decades blurred into centuries. His vanity remained perfectly intact, preserved like everything else in that poisoned place. He learned the casino systems, learned how to move through the cloud, learned how to avoid the ghost people and manipulate the holograms, learned every inch of his prison while never admitting that's what it was, because admitting the Sierra Madre had beaten him would have required humility, and Dean Domino's ego was the one thing he valued more than survival. He waited, trapped in the tomb he'd helped create, surrounded by the corpses of Sinclair's dream, sustained by bitterness and the unshakable conviction that someday someone would come who could open the vault, and when they did, Dean would finally prove he'd been better than Sinclair all along. Christine Royce arrived at the Sierra Madre, hunting a ghost. She'd tracked Father Elijah across the Mojave, following the trail of a man who'd abandoned his Brotherhood chapter and become obsessed with old-world technology. The hunt led her to Big MT, where Elijah had been conducting research. Big MT's scientists captured her and damaged her mind with their experiments. And later at the Sierra Madre, an autodoc tore out her vocal cords, leaving her mute. She'd recovered enough to continue the hunt, scarred, silent, stripped of everything except the mission. She followed Elijah's trail to the Sierra Madre and found herself trapped in the villa, another victim of the place that collected broken people like specimens. Dog arrived with Father Elijah, a Nightkin super mutant whose extended stealth boy use had caused severe schizophrenia and fractured his mind. Dog was the degraded personality, childlike, violent, desperate for a master to serve. God emerged later as a separate personality, more intelligent and pragmatic, created as a defense mechanism against Dog's vulnerabilities. The split made Dog dangerous and unpredictable, perfect for Elijah's purposes. Because Father Elijah had been preparing for years. He'd studied the Sierra Madre from a distance, pieced together its history from Big MT's records, and recognized what everyone else had missed. The Sierra Madre wasn't just a casino, it was a weapon. The cloud could be weaponized and deployed. The holograms could be reprogrammed as an indestructible army. The vending machines, which could create ammunition, food, and supplies from Sierra Madre chips, represented replicator technology that could sustain a military force indefinitely. And the vault contained not just wealth, but old world technology that had been locked away since before the bombs fell. In the right hands, the Sierra Madre could conquer the Mojave, could hold the entire wasteland hostage behind a wall of toxic gas and holographic soldiers, could impose order through overwhelming force backed by technology no one else possessed. Elijah believed his hands were the right hands. He needed someone to break into the casino, disable the security, and open the vault. He couldn't do it himself. The Sierra Madre's systems would kill him as quickly as anyone else. So he did what desperate, obsessive men do. He found expendable help. The radio beacon had been transmitting since the lockdown, broadcasting Vera's voice across the wasteland. Most who heard it knew better than to investigate. The Sierra Madre's reputation as a death trap was well established by 281, but reputation filters out the cautious, leaving only the desperate, the foolish, and the brave. The courier fit at least two of those categories. Elijah had been watching, waiting for someone capable enough to potentially succeed, but expendable enough that their death wouldn't matter. When the courier approached the Sierra Madre's perimeter, Elijah activated systems that had been dormant for centuries. Gas flooded into the villa. A collar locked around the courier's neck, one of Sinclair's security devices, designed to ensure compliance through the promise of immediate death. The collar contained an explosive. The trigger was proximity to certain radio frequencies or hologram transmitters. Get too close, and the beeping that signaled approach would escalate to detonation. Try to remove the collar, and it would explode. Try to flee the Sierra Madre, and it would explode. The only way to survive was forward, into the casino, through the security, past the ghost people and the cloud and the holograms, break into the vault, retrieve what Elijah wanted, and then maybe the collar would come off. This was the trap that had been waiting since 2077, not the trap Sinclair had built for Vera and Dean. A new trap, assembled from the corpse of Sinclair's obsession, animated by Elijah's megalomania, baited with promises of treasure and survival. 4 people entered the Sierra Madre that night, each wearing a collar, each convinced they could survive what no one else had. The courier, Christine, Dean, Dog, and from his monitoring station, Father Elijah watched them stumble into the horror he'd orchestrated, confident that this time, finally, someone would break through the security and give him access to the weapon he'd been seeking. The Sierra Madre had claimed everyone who'd entered it for 2 centuries. Everyone had been trapped, killed, or transformed into something that wished it was dead. But here's what makes Dead Money a horror story, rather than just a tragedy. The building wasn't finished killing yet. That explains why the Sierra Madre exists and how it became a tomb, but it doesn't explain what happens when you actually enter. The answer is methodical, inevitable horror, the kind where every step forward makes escape more impossible, where the building itself becomes the antagonist, and where the treasure at the end is simultaneously real and worthless. Let's walk into the trap. Chapter 2. The Villa Where Everyone is Already Dead. The cloud hits you first. Not as a wall, not as something you can see and avoid, but as a gradual thickening of the air, a rust-colored haze that seems to seep from the buildings themselves. It clings to architecture, pools in low areas, drifts through streets in currents that follow no recognizable pattern. Your Pip-Boy registers it immediately. environmental radiation ticking upward, health deteriorating. The mathematical certainty that staying in this air will kill you in minutes. The collar around your neck beeps, not constantly, just occasionally, a reminder that it's there, that it's armed, that your survival depends on obeying the voice that crackles through your Pip-Boy in transmission that shouldn't be possible. Father Elijah speaks with the calm of someone who's solved a problem. He explains the situation with almost clinical detachment. You're going to break into the Sierra Madre casino. You're going to recruit 3 other people he's trapped here. You're going to penetrate the security systems. You're going to open the vault. If you do this, the collar comes off. If you don't, you die with it still locked around your throat. The transaction is simple: comply or die. Every other choice has been removed. The villa sprawls before you like a corpse that won't admit it's dead. The architecture is beautiful in the way abandoned places sometimes are. Art Deco design weathered by centuries. Copper fixtures turned green with corrosion. Neon signs that still flicker with salvaged power. It should feel empty. Ruins usually do. Instead, it feels watched. The ghost people announce themselves with sound before sight. Footsteps that scrape and drag. Breathing that rattles through mask filters. The sense of movement in peripheral vision. Something that was just standing there, now several feet closer, having moved while you weren't looking directly at it. When you finally see one clearly, the horror is in the details. The hazmat suit is pre-war, the kind construction workers wore, now stained with rust and fluids that seep through failing seals. The helmet's faceplate is fogged from the inside, obscuring any features. The body inside moves wrong, joints bending at angles that suggest the skeleton isn't supporting weight properly anymore. Muscles twitching in patterns that aren't consciously controlled. They attack with weapons that are extensions of their bodies. Knives, cleavers, implements of violence wielded with the mechanical precision of something that doesn't feel pain and can't be reasoned with. You shoot one in the chest. It stumbles, falls, then gets back up because the cloud has made death into a suggestion rather than a certainty. The only way to stop them permanently is dismemberment. Remove the limbs or destroy the head. Make it physically impossible for the body to pursue you. Even then, you're not certain. You've seen limbs twitch after separation, seen fingers still grasping. The cloud forces constant movement. You can't stay in one place long enough to catch your breath, because breathing the air is what kills you. The villa becomes a maze where the walls are invisible. Paths defined not by architecture, but by where the cloud is thickest, where the contamination becomes immediately lethal rather than just eventually fatal. Safe zones exist in pockets, buildings where the air filtration still functions, areas where the cloud hasn't fully penetrated, but these safe zones are also choke points, places where the ghost people congregate, where the holograms have clear sight lines, where the building's security systems are most active and most lethal. The speakers scattered throughout the villa play Vera's songs on endless loop. Her voice echoes through empty streets, promising new beginnings, insisting that the hardest part is letting go. The irony is vicious. Vera's music was supposed to comfort, to provide atmosphere for guests who would never arrive. Instead, it's become the soundtrack to a graveyard. Her voice, the eternal witness to everyone who's died following it. You find the first companion in the Puesta del Sol, the villa's residential area. Christine is locked inside a switching station, trapped behind systems she can't bypass. She doesn't speak, can't, because an auto dock tore out her vocal cords, leaving her mute. Her eyes communicate what her voice can't. Desperation, determination, and the absolute focus of someone who's reduced their entire existence to a single purpose. She's hunting Elijah. Nothing else matters. Not survival, not treasure, not escape, just revenge against the man who led her into Big MT's clutches. Elijah wants her recruited because she understands technology. She can bypass security systems, rewire connections, manipulate the casino's infrastructure in ways that will be necessary later. Her inability to speak makes her compliant in Elijah's assessment. Someone who can't argue is easier to control. He's wrong, but he won't discover that until it's too late. Dean Domino is found in the Salida del Sol, the villa's northern district, holding territory like a king ruling over ruins. He's maintained an approximation of civilization: styled hair, clean clothes, the performance of dignity in circumstances that should have stripped it away. He's been here for 2 centuries, and he's made sure those centuries haven't broken him visibly. The conversation with Dean is a negotiation where both parties know the outcome is fixed, but go through the motions anyway. He needs out. You need his knowledge of the casino's layout. Elijah needs his voice. Like Vera's, Dean's vocal pattern has been logged into the Sierra Madre's security systems from when he performed here pre-war. Dean performs cooperation with the ease of someone who's spent a lifetime pretending. He's charming, helpful, full of useful information, delivered with just enough condescension to remind you that he considers himself your superior. The ego is palpable. 200 years haven't diminished his certainty that he's the smartest person in any room, that his eventual triumph over Sinclair's security is inevitable. But there's something underneath the performance, a brittleness, a rage that he keeps controlled through sheer force of vanity. Dean has spent 2 centuries trapped in a building that proved he wasn't as clever as he thought. Every day of those centuries has been a refutation of his self-image. The only thing holding him together is the belief that once the vault opens, once he finally gets the prize, all of it will have been worth it. If you challenge that belief, if you wound his ego even slightly, you see the mask slip. The hatred beneath is remarkable in its intensity. Dean doesn't just dislike Sinclair, he loathes him with the passion of someone who's spent centuries losing an argument with a dead man. Dog is found in the dog pit, the villa's canine-themed area that's become a stronghold for ghost people. Elijah has conditioned Dog to respond to audio triggers, specific phrases that bring Dog's personality to the surface or force God's emergence. It's weaponized dissociation, using Dog's fractured psychology as a control mechanism. Dog is desperate for a master. The need is pathological, Nightkin whose minds were broken by Stealth Boy exposure, and the master's psychic control develop crippling dependency. Without someone to serve, Dog doesn't know how to function. Elijah has been filling that role, and Dog's loyalty is absolute despite God's awareness that they're being exploited. God is cynical, controlled, and absolutely clear about what's happening. Elijah is using them. The courier is using them. Everyone is using everyone. And the only path forward is through compliance until an opportunity for revenge presents itself. God wants to kill Elijah, but God is also pragmatic enough to wait until survival is secured. The split between Dog and God creates a creature that's simultaneously pitiable and dangerous. You're never certain which personality is dominant, which voice you're hearing, whether cooperation is genuine or tactical. The collar around Dog's neck, matching yours, matching Christine's and Dean's, makes the question academic. Everyone here is trapped in the same mechanism. With all 4 companions recruited, Elijah transmits new instructions: enter the casino, reach the vault, retrieve what he needs. The collars will detonate if anyone strays too far from the group or attempts to flee. The only way forward is together, through the building that's been waiting since before the bombs fell, to show you exactly how alone you really are. The casino's entrance stands before you like the mouth of something vast and patient. The doors are still intact, the lights still function, the holograms flicker in and out of visibility, frozen in welcoming gestures that have been repeating for centuries. Vera's voice echoes from speakers inside. Welcome to the Sierra Madre. Let go and begin again. The building has been offering that invitation for 200 years. Everyone who accepts discovers too late that letting go means letting go of everything, your safety, your freedom, your certainty that you control your own fate. You step inside, and the Sierra Madre closes around you like a fist. This is where dead money transforms from survival horror into psychological torture, where the building stops being an environment and becomes an active presence, where every system Sinclair installed to protect Vera is weaponized against you, and where the treasure you're supposedly seeking becomes impossible to distinguish from the trap that's been waiting since the first brick was laid. The real horror of the casino isn't what it does to you, it's what it reveals about you. Chapter 3. Inside the machine that eats futures. The Sierra Madre casino should feel opulent. The architecture suggests it: sweeping staircases, crystal chandeliers that still catch light, carpets that were once luxurious now faded to ghosts of their original colors. But opulence requires space, requires the sense that you can move freely, requires the illusion that you're choosing to be here. Every inch of the casino is designed to restrict choice. The layout is deliberately confusing. Corridors branch and reconnect. Rooms lead to other rooms that loop back to where you started. The few maps you find are either incomplete or deliberately misleading, part of Sinclair's security through disorientation. Guests were meant to wander, to get lost in the luxury, to spend hours at tables because they couldn't find the exit. Now the maze serves a different purpose. It ensures you can't retreat. Every door you pass through might lock behind you. Every corridor might be the one that leads deeper into the building's core, farther from escape. The casino isn't just difficult to navigate, it's actively hostile to anyone trying to leave. The holograms patrol with mechanical precision. Their maintenance staff, dealers, entertainers, pre-war roles they've been performing for centuries in a casino that never opened. But their programming has degraded in ways that make them lethal. They don't distinguish between guests and intruders anymore. Anyone who moves through unauthorized areas receives the same response: a pulse of hard light energy that disintegrates flesh on contact. You learn to watch for the shimmer that indicates a hologram's presence. Learn to identify the patrol patterns, the sight lines, the spaces where you can move undetected. But the security is adaptive. The holograms adjust their routes based on your behavior, learning from your attempts to avoid them. The realization that hits somewhere in the Tampico or the restaurant is that you're not bypassing security. You're participating in a test. Every obstacle you overcome just proves to the building systems that you're capable of facing harder obstacles. The Sierra Madre isn't trying to keep you out. It's trying to determine whether you're worthy of what's inside. That's the horror at the core of Sinclair's design. He built a building that judges. The radio signals that trigger your collar are everywhere. Speakers emit them. Hologram emitters radiate them. Even the architecture contains frequencies that make your collar beep warnings that escalate toward detonation. You're forced into constant awareness of the explosive locked around your neck, hypervigilance that turns every moment into a calculation of risk. You find the source of a signal, disable it, move forward, encounter another signal. The pattern repeats until you understand that there's no permanent solution. You can't remove all the triggers because they're woven into the building's infrastructure. The only way to survive is to become skilled at recognizing and avoiding detonation just long enough to reach the next checkpoint. It's exhausting. Not physically, though, that too. Psychologically. The collar is a weight that never lessens, a countdown that's always running even when it's not audible. It transforms the casino from a location into a time limit. You're not exploring, you're racing against the next trigger, the next hologram patrol, the next locked door that forces you into a room where the cloud seeps through ventilation. The cloud reaches even into the casino, though less pervasively than in the villa. It concentrates in certain areas: the basement, the theater, the kitchen, places where ventilation has failed or where Big MT's systems are still actively pumping contamination. These areas become instant death zones if your rad resistance isn't sufficient, or if you've run out of healing supplies. Supplies are the constant crisis. Ammunition is scarce. Weapons degrade faster than you can repair them. Food and water provide minimal healing compared to the constant drain from the cloud and combat. The Sierra Madre strips you of the abundance that defines late game fallout. Suddenly you're vulnerable again. Weak, forced to avoid fights you could normally win because you can't afford the resource expenditure. The vending machines offer a solution that makes everything worse. They're big MT technology, matter replicators that can create items from Sierra Madre chips. Food, ammo, stim packs, weapon repair kits, everything you need available in exchange for currency that's scattered throughout the casino, but the exchange rate is brutal. A single stim pack costs chips you'll have to scavenge from dozens of locations. The weapons they offer are pre-war models that are weak by wasteland standards. The food provides minimal sustenance. You're forced into constant scavenging, turning every room into a place you have to search thoroughly, every encounter into a calculation of whether the chip reward justifies the ammunition expense. The vending machines teach learned helplessness. You become dependent on them because nothing else is available. You spend all your resources at them because there's nowhere else to spend resources. The casino's economy is closed, circular, designed to keep you perpetually on the edge of survival while never quite killing you, because killing you too quickly would end the test. The gala event that Elijah forces you to trigger is where the building's intelligence becomes undeniable. The casino was designed for a grand opening that never occurred, a celebration where Sinclair would unveil the Sierra Madre to invited guests, where Vera would perform, where everything Sinclair built would finally justify its existence. 2 centuries later, activating the gala means triggering every system simultaneously. Every hologram activates, every speaker broadcasts at full volume, every light illuminates, every security measure engages. The building wakes up fully, and you discover that what seemed like hostile environment was actually the Sierra Madre running on minimal power. At full function, it's overwhelming. Dean knows the casino's layout from pre-war work. He directs you to the terminals that need accessing, the systems that need bypassing. But his directions carry that edge of superiority. He's helping because circumstances force cooperation, not because he's genuinely your ally. Every instruction comes with subtle reminders that he's smarter than you, that he knew Sinclair personally, that he understands this building's secrets in ways you never will. Christine's role is technical, rewiring systems, accessing subsystems, using her Brotherhood training to manipulate technology that should be beyond Wastelander understanding. She works in silence, her absence of voice somehow more communicative than speech. When she looks at you, there's recognition. You're both tools being used by Elijah, both trapped in the same mechanism. The difference is that she chose this. She followed Elijah here deliberately, knowing it might kill her, because revenge mattered more than survival. Dog, whichever personality is dominant, provides brute force, clearing paths through ghost people who've somehow infiltrated the casino, breaking through barriers, and occasionally, God's voice cutting through the mission to remind you that when this is over, when the collars come off, settling debts becomes possible. The companions are simultaneously essential and dangerous. You need them to progress, but their presence is a liability. The collars enforce proximity, meaning you can't abandon them when situations become untenable. You're chained together by technology and necessity, a team that exists only because Elijah welded you into one. The scattered terminals throughout the casino contain the Sierra Madre's real treasure, information. Sinclair's logs document the building's construction, his growing paranoia about Vera and Dean's relationship, his dawning awareness of betrayal. Vera's recordings reveal her illness, her fear, her recognition that she was trading one prison for another. Dean's logs show decades and then centuries of bitterness, his ego sustaining him through isolation that would have broken anyone with capacity for self-doubt. And underneath all of it, Big MT's research notes. Clinical observations of how the construction workers responded to the cloud exposure. Measurements of how long the hazmat suits maintained integrity. Calculations about how many deaths were acceptable losses in pursuit of data. The Sierra Madre was an experiment from the beginning. Sinclair thought he was building a fortress. He was actually funding Big MT's research into how to make buildings into weapons, how to turn environmental systems into prisons, how to create spaces that killed selectively and sustainably. Everyone who entered the Sierra Madre, from the construction workers to Vera to you, has been a test subject. The building has been collecting data continuously, learning from every death, refining its security based on how previous victims failed. The vault draws closer. Elijah's transmissions become more frequent, more urgent. He can taste proximity to what he's been seeking. The tone shifts from instructions to demands. He's not asking anymore. He's commanding, threatening, promising that failure means detonation, that compliance means survival. But something in his voice suggests he's lying, that the collar's coming off was never part of the plan, that once you've opened the vault, once Elijah has what he needs, disposing of witnesses becomes the logical next step. Dean hears it too. His comments become more pointed, more explicitly about betrayal. He spent 200 years recognizing when someone's planning to stab you in the back. He invented half those techniques himself. He knows Elijah is going to try to kill everyone the moment the vault opens. Christine knows it absolutely. She's been hunting Elijah long enough to understand his patterns. He doesn't leave loose ends. He doesn't show gratitude. He uses people until they're no longer useful, then eliminates them. The collar was always going to detonate. The only question is when. The vault's entrance is magnificent. Brass doors engraved with Art Deco designs, Sinclair's final gesture of devotion made physical. The locking mechanism requires your companions to stand at specific terminals, speaking designated phrases in voices the system recognizes from pre-war security recordings. Dean speaks his phrase with theatrical contempt. Christine triggers her terminal with gestures that communicate what voice can't. Dog provides the final sequence, God's pragmatism allowing cooperation despite knowing it brings everyone closer to Elijah's betrayal. The vault opens, and inside, surrounded by more wealth than you could carry in multiple lifetimes, is the thing everyone missed. This was always a trap. Sinclair built it as one. Elijah just repurposed existing mechanisms. The gold bars are real, stacks of them. Pre-war currency that has value across the wasteland. Enough to buy armies or cities or anything material wealth can purchase. There are also weapons, technology, supplies, everything the Sierra Madre stored away for the celebration that never happened. But Elijah isn't interested in wealth. He's interested in the vending machine technology that can replicate matter, in the cloud that can be weaponized and deployed, in the holograms that can be reprogrammed as indestructible soldiers. The vault contains the access codes to all of it, the master control systems that would let someone turn the Sierra Madre from a tomb into a weapon of conquest. Elijah's voice crackles through the Pip-Boy. Remain in the vault. He's coming down personally to retrieve what he needs. Once he has it, he'll decide whether to let you live or detonate the collar. Maybe both. The decision delivered with a casualness that confirms he's been planning your death since the moment he lured you here. The vault door begins to close. The building security activates final protocols. The Sierra Madre is demonstrating its ultimate lesson. The treasure isn't worth it. It never was, because the cost of reaching it was everything you had to carry out of here. And now that you've claimed the prize, the building is closing around you like a coffin. This is the choice dead money has been building toward. Do you let go, or do you insist on taking what you came for, even though it will kill you? The answer determines not whether you survive. The game won't let you die here if you're clever enough. The answer determines what you become, whether you're capable of walking away from everything you work toward, or whether greed is stronger than self-preservation. The final confrontation isn't about combat. It's about whether you understand what the Sierra Madre has been trying to teach you all along. Chapter 4: Father Elijah and the Gospel of Old World Controls. Elijah arrives at the Sierra Madre, like a prophet returning to a promised land, and that's the first sign that something in him broke long before he found this place. He was Brotherhood of Steel once, not just a member, but an elder, leader of the Mojave chapter that was supposed to preserve and protect Old World technology. The Brotherhood's mission is fundamentally conservative. Recover pre-war knowledge, prevent it from falling into irresponsible hands, ensure that the science that destroyed the world doesn't destroy it again. Elijah believed in that mission with religious fervor, but somewhere between believing and enforcing, his interpretation metastasized into something the Brotherhood couldn't contain. He saw the old world not as a cautionary tale, but as a golden age. He looked at pre-war technology and saw perfection that had been lost rather than hubris that had consumed itself. Where others saw weapons that had ended civilization, Elijah saw tools that had simply been wielded by inferior minds. When he led the Brotherhood chapter to Helios 1, the solar power plant that could theoretically weaponize concentrated sunlight, he wasn't trying to secure dangerous technology. He was trying to activate it. The NCR assault on Helios 1 forced Elijah's hand. He should have retreated with his chapter, preserved Brotherhood lives over Brotherhood pride. Instead, he ordered them to hold the facility while he tried desperately to unlock Helios 1's weapon capabilities. He was so certain he could turn the power plant into a death ray that would vaporize the NCR forces that he sacrificed his own people, buying time for a miracle that never came. When the position became untenable, when it was evacuate or die, Elijah simply disappeared, abandoned his chapter, left them to retreat in disarray while he slipped away into the wasteland, carrying only his obsession and the crushing knowledge that he'd failed to unlock Helios 1's secrets. The Brotherhood declared him missing, presumed dead. In reality, he'd begun a pilgrimage to every old world facility he could reach, searching for technology powerful enough to validate his vision. He traveled to Big MT, the think tank installation where pre-war scientists had achieved breakthroughs that crossed from innovation into atrocity. Big MT broke most people who entered. The scientists there had removed their own brains, installed them in hovering machines, and spent 2 centuries conducting experiments with no ethical constraints and no memory of why they'd started. They captured Elijah like they captured everyone who approached, as a specimen, a subject, an opportunity for data collection. What they did to him during his captivity remains partially redacted in the logs. There were surgical interventions, psychological conditioning, exposure to technologies that weren't meant for living minds. When Elijah eventually escaped, and the fact that he escaped at all suggests either remarkable willpower or that Big MT let him go deliberately. He'd been changed in ways that weren't entirely visible but were absolutely fundamental. Christine Royce had been following him. She was Brotherhood too, a scribe from the Circle of Steel, the Brotherhood's internal investigators who hunt rogue members and recover stolen technology. Christine had taken an oath to bring Elijah back or confirm his death. The hunt became personal when Elijah led her into Big MT's trap. The think tank scientists performed their standard procedures on her. They damaged her mind with a crude lobotomy and other procedures. Then they lost interest and released her back into the wasteland. Another failed experiment, joining the hundreds of others wandering the Mojave with scrambled minds and no understanding of how they'd been violated. Christine recovered enough cognitive function to resume the hunt. She couldn't speak, couldn't express anything through voice, but the mission remained: find Elijah, kill him, prevent whatever he was planning from manifesting. The drive was stronger than trauma, more fundamental than survival instinct. She'd become a weapon pointed at a single target, and everything else, identity, desire, future, had been burned away in service of that purpose. She tracked Elijah to the Sierra Madre and found herself trapped just like everyone else. The collar, the cloud, the building that had been waiting for victims. She'd walked into Elijah's final trap knowing it was a trap, unable to stop herself because revenge required proximity. Elijah had spent years studying the Sierra Madre from a distance, piecing together its history from Big MT's research archives. He understood what Sinclair had built better than Sinclair himself had, because Sinclair had been building a fortress for love, a fundamentally irrational project, while Elijah looked at the same systems and saw a weapon for conquest. The cloud was chemical warfare refined to perfection. It could be manufactured, deployed, sustained over centuries with minimal power requirements. It killed slowly enough that victims had time to understand they were dying. It transformed corpses into ghost people who continued to defend the area long after their deaths. A single cloud deployment could render territory permanently uninhabitable to enemies while remaining accessible to anyone with proper protective equipment. The holograms were an indestructible army. They couldn't be killed because they weren't alive. They could be programmed for any purpose. They required no food, no rest, no morale. They would execute orders with perfect precision for centuries, if necessary, and they could be projected anywhere the Sierra Madre's technology could reach, which, with proper modifications, could be anywhere with sufficient power infrastructure. The vending machines represented post-scarcity, replicator technology that could create ammunition, supplies, even weapons from raw materials and energy. An army equipped with Sierra Madre vending machines would never run out of ammunition, never face supply line disruptions, never be starved into surrender. And the vault contained the master control systems for all of it. Elijah's vision was crystalline in its terrible clarity. Seal the Mojave behind the cloud. Position the holograms at every major settlement. Offer humanity a choice between submission and suffocation. Those who complied would be granted access to the vending machines, given enough resources to survive but never enough to threaten his control. Those who resisted would be left outside the cloud perimeters to die slowly, their corpses becoming new ghost people to reinforce the defensive barriers. It was order through overwhelming force, civilization rebuilt from the top down by someone finally smart enough to wield old-world technology properly. The wasteland's constant violence, its petty factions and tribal conflicts, and brotherhood inflexibility, all of it would end because Elijah would make resistance materially impossible. He would become the father of a new world, the architect of a forced peace, the singular mind imposing structure on chaos. The ego required to see yourself as humanity's savior through technological tyranny is difficult to comprehend until you understand what ego actually is, the story you tell yourself about why you matter. Elijah's story was that he'd been right about Helios 1, right about the Brotherhood's mission, right to sacrifice his chapter for a greater goal. Every failure could be reframed as the world's failure to recognize his vision. Every setback proved that lesser minds were incapable of understanding what he understood. And the Sierra Madre, finally, after years of searching, was the tool that would prove it. He needed someone to break into the casino because he couldn't do it himself without triggering security systems. He needed someone to open the vault because the voice recognition wouldn't accept his authorization. He needed expendable help, and the courier was simply the most viable candidate who'd approached the Sierra Madre's broadcast range. The collars were control mechanisms, but they were also tests, Elijah wanted to see if the courier could overcome obstacles that had killed everyone else for 2 centuries. If you made it to the vault, you'd proven yourself capable, which made you useful. It also made you dangerous, which meant you needed to be eliminated once you'd served your purpose. Elijah planned to detonate all 4 collars the moment he had the vault's access codes. Christine, Dean, Dog, the courier. All of you were tools he'd never intended to maintain after use. He might have felt mild regret about the waste, the way someone feels regret about breaking a useful implement, but no moral qualms. You were means to an end. The end justified disposal. He broadcasts this to you with the casual certainty of someone who believes he's already won. He's entering the vault. You're trapped inside with him. The door sealed, the security activated, no escape route visible. He'll take what he needs from the terminals. Then he'll detonate your collar and leave your corpse alongside all the other corpses this building has collected. But Elijah makes the mistake every egomaniac makes. He assumes his intelligence means other people are stupid. Dean has been planning betrayal since the moment he understood Elijah's intentions. Christine has been planning murder since before she entered the Sierra Madre. Dog God has been waiting for an opportunity that favors survival over loyalty. And you, the courier, have been shot in the head once already. You know what it looks like when someone thinks you're too broken to be dangerous. The confrontation in the vault isn't combat in traditional sense. It's a conversation where every word is a weapon and every second of delay is a victory. Elijah is brilliant, but brilliance has limits when you're facing someone who's survived Benny, Caesar, House, and everything the Mojave has tried to use as your tombstone. You can fight him directly. Use the vault's security against him. Turn the building's weapons on their new master. Prove that Sinclair's trap works just as well on Brotherhood elders as it did on construction workers. The irony is perfect. Elijah came to claim the Sierra Madre and instead becomes its final victim, sealed in the vault he wanted to control, trapped in the tomb he meant to weaponize. Or you can talk him into the trap more subtly. Appeal to his ego, convince him you understand his vision, make him believe you're surrendering to his intellectual superiority. Get him to lower his guard just enough to position him where the security systems have clear targeting. Then trigger the lockdown and walk away, while he realizes too late that he never controlled this building. It controlled everyone who entered, including him. The collar comes off when Elijah dies, or when you escape the vault's radius. The weight around your neck that's been dictating every movement suddenly releases. You can breathe without calculating detonation triggers. You can move without hypervigilance. The building's grip loosens just enough to allow escape. But there's still the gold, 37 gold bars sitting in the vault, each one worth thousands of caps. Enough wealth to buy anything the wasteland offers, enough to fund armies, build settlements, live in luxury for multiple lifetimes. It's right there. You've earned it. Survived the cloud, the ghost people, the holograms, the psychological torture of the collars. You've beaten the Sierra Madre's security. The gold is yours if you can carry it out. The trap is that you can't. Not all of it. The weight exceeds your carrying capacity even if you drop everything else. The vault's exit is timed. You have seconds before the security reactivates and traps you. Inside permanently. You'd have to run, and you can't run while over-encumbered. The game gives you a choice. Take what you can reasonably carry and escape, or try to take everything and die trying. Most players try to take everything. They drop all their weapons, armor, supplies, anything with weight that isn't gold. They trigger the exit sequence and shuffle toward the door at the agonizing pace of over-encumbrance. They're feet away from freedom, can see the escape route, can taste success. The door closes, the security activates. The building reclaims another victim who refused to let go. Dead Money's final lesson isn't about whether you escape. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for wealth that won't matter if you're dead. The Sierra Madre has been teaching this lesson for 200 years. Greed is a weight that drags you down, and the only way to survive is to let go of what you think you deserve. But there's a trick to stealing the gold if you're clever enough. If you've positioned Elijah's corpse correctly, if you understand the vault's security timing, if you're willing to exploit mechanics the way speedrunners exploit mechanics, you can escape with all 37 bars. It requires precise execution and understanding that breaks the intended design. The question is whether doing so means you won or missed the point entirely. Chapter 5: What the Dead Left Behind. Christine's story ends in the Sierra Madre casino's backstage area, surrounded by technology she understands better than language. She'd been Brotherhood of Steel, trained to manipulate old-world systems, conditioned to see technology as sacred and its misuse as heresy. Elijah was heresy made flesh, a Brotherhood elder who'd become exactly what the Brotherhood existed to prevent. If she survives the vault, if Elijah dies, Christine faces a choice that's simultaneously freedom and condemnation. She can leave the Sierra Madre, or she can stay. The casino systems need maintenance. The holograms need monitoring. The cloud needs containment. If these systems fail, if the Sierra Madre's technology spreads beyond its current perimeter, the entire Mojave could become a toxic graveyard. Someone needs to tend the machine, to ensure that Sinclair's nightmare stays localized. Christine stays, not because she's trapped. Her collar is deactivated, the exits are accessible. She stays because she's Brotherhood, and Brotherhood doctrine is clear. Dangerous technology must be secured. If she can't destroy it, she'll contain it. If she can't contain it, she'll die trying to prevent it from spreading. She finds Vera's remains in the executive suite, finds the terminal where Vera recorded her final messages, finds evidence of a woman who'd been trapped by addiction, manipulation, and a building that promised salvation but delivered only isolation. Christine begins maintaining the Sierra Madre from the inside, a silent guardian watching over a tomb, ensuring that Sinclair's obsession and Elijah's ambition remain buried. She'll spend however many years she has left, decades, maybe centuries if the building's preservation effects work on her, like they worked on Dean, tending machinery in silence, her voice taken by Big MT, her future surrendered to prevent catastrophe. It's an ending that looks like imprisonment, but feels like purpose. Christine had been hunting Elijah for so long that his death left her without direction. The Sierra Madre gives her a new mission: ensure no one else is hurt by the technology that destroyed her. There's tragedy in that choice, but also dignity. She's choosing confinement to prevent suffering. She's becoming a cage for the Sierra Madre, wrapping herself around its dangers so they can't spread. It's sacrifice without audience or recognition. The Brotherhood's mission statement made flesh: protect humanity from technology it can't responsibly wield, even if protection requires your life. Dean Domino's ending is darker and infinitely pettier. If he survives, if you've maintained his ego, avoided wounding his pride, played the role of subordinate to his superiority, he escapes the Sierra Madre with you. The collar comes off. The cloud clears. He's free for the first time in 200 years. And he's learned nothing. Dean returns to the wasteland still performing, still convinced of his inevitable stardom, still bitter about Sinclair. 2 centuries trapped in a building haven't taught him humility or gratitude or any capacity for self-reflection. He survived the unsurvivable, and his takeaway is that he was right all along. He is better than everyone else, and his eventual recognition is merely delayed, not denied. He drifts through the Mojave as an entertainer, performing in settlements and bars, always convinced the next show will be the one that proves his genius. He's a ghost of the pre-war world, still acting out scripts from a civilization that's been dead for 2 centuries, unable to accept that the audience is gone and the stage has collapsed. If you wound his ego during your time together, challenge him, prove yourself his equal, remind him that Sinclair built something Dean never could, his ending shifts toward violence. He'll try to kill you after escaping, unable to tolerate the living reminder of his inadequacy, or he'll die in the Sierra Madre, his vanity finally costing him the survival it barely sustained. Dean's curse is that he can't let go, not of his resentment towards Sinclair, not of his belief in his own superiority, not of the conviction that he deserves recognition the world refuses to grant. The Sierra Madre released his body, but his mind remains trapped in the casino's final days, endlessly replaying the moment when he should have been vindicated, but was instead proven utterly insufficient. Dog God's fate depends on which personality dominates when the collar comes off. If Dog remains ascendant, he's lost without a master. Elijah's death creates a void that Dog doesn't know how to fill. He might attach to the courier, might wander the wasteland searching for new authority to serve, might eventually succumb to the violence and confusion that defines Nightkin existence. Dog was broken by the master's death and never healed. Every master since has been a replacement for something irreplaceable. If God gains control, the ending is more calculated. God understands they were used, understands the collar was always meant to kill them, understands that survival required submission, but continuation requires autonomy. God takes Dog's body into the wasteland and disappears, avoiding the Brotherhood, the NCR, the Courier, anyone who might try to use them again. There's no healing for Dog God. The Stealth Boy damage and the Master's psychic conditioning created fractures too fundamental to repair. The best possible ending is managed coexistence between personalities, a life defined by constant negotiation between the desperate need to serve and the pragmatic recognition that service has only ever led to exploitation. The ghost people continue their shambling patrols through the villa, unchanged and unchanging. They're not freed by Elijah's death or the vault opening. They're not aware enough to be freed. They're biological machines running on routines established 200 years ago, defending territory that no longer needs defending, attacking intruders who pose no threat to anything they could possibly value. The cloud persists. Christine's maintenance might slow its spread, but can't eliminate it. The Sierra Madre will remain toxic, will remain lethal, will remain a graveyard that occasionally attracts scavengers desperate or foolish enough to test its defenses. Most will die. A few might escape with minor treasures. None will claim the vault's contents. That door sealed when you left, and it won't open again for anyone lacking Vera's voice and Dean's authorization. The hologram of Vera Keyes continues, performing in the casino's theater, her image preserved in hard light projection, singing songs about beginning again and letting go to an audience of corpses and dust. She's been performing for 2 centuries. She'll perform for 2 more or 20 until the power finally fails or the technology degrades past function. The Sierra Madre becomes a legend. Stories circulate in the Mojave about the casino in the mountains, the place that promises treasure and delivers death, the building that no one escapes with their greed intact. Some call it cursed, others call it a vault waiting for someone clever enough to crack it. All of them are wrong. The Sierra Madre isn't cursed, it's functioning exactly as designed. Sinclair built a trap for love that became a trap for everyone. Big MT built experiments into the infrastructure. Elijah tried to weaponize it, and the building itself absorbed all these intentions and transformed them into a single pure purpose: teach the lesson that greed kills. Everyone who enters the Sierra Madre carrying the belief that they deserve its treasure discovers the same truth. Desire is a collar. Obsession is a detonation trigger. And the only way to survive is to walk away from everything you think you've earned. Chapter 6. The Courier Who Learned to Let Go. You leave the Sierra Madre carrying what you managed to grab before the vault sealed. Maybe it's a few gold bars. Maybe it's weapons or technology. Maybe it's nothing but the clothes on your back and the knowledge that you survived something that's killed everyone else for 200 years. The collar is gone, but you still feel its weight. That's how trauma works. The physical object can be removed, but the hypervigilance remains. You find yourself checking your neck periodically, confirming nothing's there, unable to trust that the threat has actually ended. In quiet moments, you hear phantom beeping, your nervous system conditioned to interpret any electronic sound as countdown to detonation. The cloud's effects linger in your lungs. You're coughing up blood for days afterward, your respiratory system damaged in ways that stim packs can only partially address. The rad damage leaves its mark, your Pip-Boy registers elevated levels that fade slowly, proof that the Sierra Madre's contamination clings even after you've escaped its source. But you're alive. That's the victory dead money offers. Not triumph, not treasure, not the satisfaction of conquering an unconquerable challenge. Just survival. Just the ability to walk away when every instinct screamed to stay, to claim what you'd earned, to prove the building couldn't beat you. The radio signal continues broadcasting Vera's voice across the Mojave. You can still hear it on certain frequencies, still catch fragments of Begin Again when atmospheric conditions align correctly. The song that once promised salvation now sounds like a warning. This is what obsession sounds like when it's been preserved past the point where anyone remembers what they were obsessed with. You return to the Mojave carrying lessons that the wasteland's other challenges didn't teach. The NCR and Legion fight over territory. That's greed, but it's comprehensible greed. Benny shot you for a platinum chip, that's betrayal. But you understand betrayal. House wants to resurrect Vegas. That's ambition. And ambition makes sense even when you oppose it. The Sierra Madre was different. It wasn't trying to kill you for strategic advantage. It wasn't an enemy with comprehensible motivations. It was a building that had been weaponized by love, by obsession, by the fundamental human inability to accept loss. And it taught you that the wasteland's most dangerous threats aren't the ones with armies or power armor. They're the ones that promise you deserve more than survival. If you go back, and the game allows you to return to the Sierra Madre's perimeter, you find that nothing has changed. The cloud still churns through the villa. The ghost people still patrol. The casino still broadcasts its eternal invitation. The building learned nothing from your success because it's not capable of learning. It will continue functioning as designed until the power fails, or the technology finally decays into silence. Christine is inside, maintaining the systems, ensuring the nightmare stays contained. You can't reach her, can't thank her for the sacrifice she's making, can't tell her that what she's doing matters. She's chosen isolation to protect people who'll never know her name, and that's as close to heroism as the wasteland allows. Dean is somewhere in the Mojave if he survived, still performing, still bitter, still convinced his vindication is delayed rather than denied. You might encounter him in a settlement somewhere, singing songs no one recognizes, talking about the Sierra Madre like he conquered it rather than barely escaped. His delusion is complete and probably permanent. Dog God is gone, disappeared into whatever spaces night can occupy when they're not making themselves problems for human settlements. You hope God's pragmatism keeps Dog alive. You suspect it doesn't matter. Some damage doesn't heal, and Dog God was broken long before the Sierra Madre added new scars. The gold you manage to carry out, if any, spends like any other currency. It's worth exactly what merchants will pay, which is significant but not transformative. You can buy better weapons, can fund settlements, can ease your path through the Mojave's constant resource demands, but it doesn't change anything fundamental. You're still the courier, still walking toward whatever ending your choices have been constructing, still carrying scars from a bullet to the head and a collar around your neck. The question dead money leaves you with isn't whether you escaped. You did. The question is what you left behind and whether that was cowardice or wisdom. Did you abandon treasure you'd earned, or did you finally understand that earning something doesn't mean you have to claim it. Did you let go because the Sierra Madre taught you its lesson? Or did you let go because you were afraid? Is walking away from wealth strength or surrender? The game doesn't answer. It just watches you return to the Mojave carrying less than you entered with, marked by experiences you can't fully articulate, changed in ways you won't understand until you face the next crisis and discover that your responses have shifted. Because that's dead money's real horror and its real gift. It changes you below the level where change is visible. You didn't learn lessons you can articulate in advice. You learned visceral truths about weight and greed, and the cost of holding on past the point where holding on serves any purpose beyond proving you're too stubborn to release your grip. The Sierra Madre killed everyone who couldn't let go. You survived because you could, but survival doesn't feel like victory. It feels like walking away from a fight you're not certain you won, carrying the suspicion that the building let you leave because you were never a threat to begin with. The Mojave wasteland continues its pointless violence. The NCR and Legion march toward their inevitable confrontation. House calculates probabilities in his tower. Yes, man smiles and obeys, and you, the courier who survived a bullet and a collar, return to the larger war, carrying the knowledge that the deadliest threats aren't the ones with armies. They're the ones that promise you deserve salvation. This feels like where Dead Money's story should end. The courier escapes, the companions scatter or sacrifice themselves, the Sierra Madre remains a tomb, and the lesson is taught to anyone paying attention. Greed is a weight that kills. But there's one more thread we haven't pulled. One more question Dead Money poses that most players never think to ask. What was Frederick Sinclair trying to say? Chapter 7. The Message in the Machine. The Sierra Madre's terminals are scattered throughout the casino and villa, each one containing fragments of the facility's history. Most players skim them for access codes or security overrides, reading only what's necessary to progress. But if you sit with them, if you actually read every terminal entry, every note, every message Sinclair left embedded in the systems, a different story emerges. Sinclair knew. Before the bombs fell, before the cloud, before Vera's death and Dean's betrayal fully materialized, Sinclair understood what he'd built. Not intellectually. His logs make clear he was still rationalizing his decisions as protective rather than possessive. But some part of him, the part that wrote messages in the deepest systems where Vera would never read them, knew the Sierra Madre was a prison disguised as paradise. He wrote messages to himself, warnings that sound like affirmations. She'll be safe here. No one can hurt her here. This is love. But the frequency with which he repeats these statements suggests a man trying to convince himself of something his deeper awareness doubts. People confident in their choices don't need to constantly reaffirm them to themselves. There's a terminal in the maintenance area, beneath the casino, accessible only if you're willing to navigate sections where the cloud is thickest and the ghost people most numerous. Most players never reach it. The terminal contains Sinclair's final recordings, made in the hours or days before he died trying to dismantle the revenge trap he'd built for Vera. He's rambling. The cloud's effects are already manifesting. Coughing, disorientation, the awareness that he's dying, but he's trying to leave a message for anyone who eventually finds this place. He talks about how love became obsession, how protection became control, how the need to keep Vera safe transformed into the need to ensure she could never leave. He says he's sorry. To her, to the workers who died during construction, to everyone who entered the Sierra Madre and found themselves trapped. He's sorry, but the sorrow is theoretical. He still doesn't understand, can't understand what went wrong. Because from his perspective, his intentions were pure. He loved Vera. He wanted to protect her. The fact that his love became her cage doesn't compute. This is Dead Money's most subtle horror. Sinclair isn't a villain in any recognizable sense. He's a man who loved someone and had enough resources to build that love into architecture. Everything he did came from genuine care, and everything he did was monstrous, precisely because it came from genuine care that refused to consider what the object of that care actually wanted. Vera's terminals tell a different story, the view from inside the cage. She talks about feeling suffocated by Sinclair's attention, about how his generosity always came with invisible strings. She couldn't refuse gifts without hurting him, couldn't object to his plans without seeming ungrateful, couldn't express any desire that contradicted his vision of their future together without watching him become wounded and confused. The Sierra Madre was the ultimate manifestation of that dynamic. Sinclair built her a paradise where every need would be met, except the need for autonomy, for choice, for the freedom to be unsafe if that's what she chose. He was building a gilded cage and calling it love. And Vera knew it but couldn't articulate it because Sinclair's intentions were so obviously good. So she turned to Dean. Not because Dean was better. Dean was worse, manipulative and narcissistic and fundamentally incapable of caring about her as anything but a tool. But Dean offered something Sinclair couldn't: the absence of care. Dean didn't want to protect her. He wanted to use her. And after months of drowning in Sinclair's suffocating devotion, being used felt like breathing. The betrayal wasn't just about robbing the vault. It was about Vera's desperate attempt to prove she still had agency, that she could make her own choices even if those choices were destructive. She chose Dean's exploitation over Sinclair's devotion because exploitation at least acknowledged she was capable of being used, while devotion treated her like something that needed protecting from her own decisions. Both men destroyed her. Sinclair through love, Dean through contempt, and the Sierra Madre preserved the evidence of that destruction in its systems, turning Vera into a ghost, singing endless songs about beginning again, as if repetition could eventually make the promise true. The ghost people are the ultimate symbol of what the Sierra Madre does. It preserves you past the point where preservation has meaning. It keeps you alive, technically, biologically, while destroying everything that made being alive worthwhile. You're sustained but not living, functioning but not human, existing but not present. That's what Sinclair's love did to Vera. Kept her alive, kept her protected, kept her safe. But being safe isn't the same as being able to live, and protection that prevents all risk also prevents all growth. She died in the Sierra Madre, but she'd been dying since Sinclair decided loving her meant removing her ability to choose danger. Big MT's contribution makes the horror complete. They didn't care about love or betrayal or any human drama. They saw the Sierra Madre as a laboratory, and everyone inside it as test subjects. They measured how long the construction workers survived in degrading hazmat suits. They documented how the cloud affected different physiologies. They observed how security systems influenced behavior. The scientists treated suffering as data to be collected, and from their perspective, the Sierra Madre was a successful experiment. They gathered valuable information about human responses to chronic stress, toxic exposure, and architectural control. The fact that gathering that information required destroying hundreds of lives was simply the cost of research. When you read the big MT terminals alongside Sinclair's and Vera's and Dean's, you see the complete picture. Love became obsession, became prison. And then science wrapped itself around the whole structure and turned human suffering into publishable results. Chapter 8: Why Dead Money Still Matters. Dead Money is the most hated and most loved DLC in Fallout New Vegas, and both responses come from the same source. It changes the rules. The base game is about power. You're building strength, accumulating resources, choosing which faction deserves your support in reshaping the Mojave. You're becoming powerful enough that Caesar and House and the NCR all want your allegiance because you can tip the balance. You're the protagonist, of a story about accumulation. Every quest adds to your capabilities. Every weapon makes you stronger. Every level makes you more capable of imposing your will on the wasteland. Dead money strips all of that away. Your equipment is confiscated. Your levels don't matter when the cloud kills you, regardless of hit points. Your accumulated knowledge of the wasteland doesn't help you navigate a casino designed to confuse. You're weak again, vulnerable, forced to run from threats you'd normally face directly. Players who enjoy power fantasy hate dead money for this reason. They've spent dozens of hours building a character, and the DLC essentially says none of that matters here. It's invalidating in a way that feels personal. You worked for this strength, and the game is taking it away. But players who love dead money love it for exactly that reason. It's horror that works through vulnerability. It's tension that exists because you can't just shoot your way out. It's a story that requires you to be weaker than the threats you face, because that weakness creates the emotional space for the themes to land. If you could just kill the holograms and ignore the collar and tank the cloud damage, Dead Money would be another shoot-through-it adventure. The deliberate weakening is what creates the horror, and horror requires vulnerability, or it's just action with red lighting. The survival horror mechanics, limited resources, deadly environment, emphasis on avoidance over combat, were unusual for Fallout. The series had flirted with horror before, but always from a position of eventual strength. You entered dark vaults or faced terrifying enemies, but you knew that getting stronger would eventually trivialize the threats. Dead Money says no. You can't become strong enough to trivialize the Sierra Madre. The cloud will always kill you eventually. The holograms will always vaporize you. The collar will always threaten detonation. Strength doesn't solve the problem. Only letting go does. This thematic consistency, mechanics reinforcing message, is what elevates Dead Money from frustrating difficulty spike to legitimate artistic statement. The gameplay isn't difficult for challenge's sake. It's difficult because the difficulty is the point. The Sierra Madre is supposed to feel oppressive, suffocating, impossible. That oppression teaches the lesson about weight and greed and letting go more effectively than any dialogue could. When you finally escape and still feel the impulse to go back for more gold, when you're standing at the vault exit over-encumbered and trying to figure out if you can make it through the door, when you're seconds from freedom but unwilling to drop the bars because you've earned them, that's when you feel what Sinclair felt, what Vera felt, what Dean felt, what Elijah felt, the desperate certainty that you deserve this, that you've suffered for it, that walking away without claiming what's rightfully yours would invalidate everything you've endured, that the weight is bearable if you just try hard enough. And then the door closes, the security activates, the building kills you with your own greed, and you respawn outside the vault with the bitter knowledge that you died for nothing, that the gold wasn't worth it, that you'd been taught the lesson and refused to learn it and paid the price for that refusal. That's Dead Money's genius. It doesn't just tell you that greed kills. It lets you feel the grip of greed, the way it promises meaning and delivers only weight. It lets you experience the exact psychological trap that killed Sinclair and Vera and Dean and everyone else. And then it watches to see if you've learned anything or if you're going to reload and try again. Convinced this time you'll figure out how to have everything. The fact that you can eventually succeed through mechanical exploitation, that speedrunners have found ways to escape with all the gold, doesn't invalidate the message. If anything, it reinforces it. You can beat the Sierra Madre through meticulous preparation, through understanding systems at a level beyond intended design, through treating the DLC as a mechanical puzzle instead of a thematic experience, but doing so requires transforming yourself into exactly what Elijah was. Someone so obsessed with claiming the prize that you'll spend hours studying systems, practicing timing, reducing the entire experience to mathematical optimization. You become the greed the Sierra Madre warns against, and your victory proves you missed the point spectacularly. Dead money matters because it's willing to risk player frustration for thematic coherence. It trusts that some players will understand what it's trying to do even as others bounce off it completely. It doesn't compromise its horror or its message to be more palatable to people who want different experiences, and it matters because its themes extend beyond the game. The Sierra Madre isn't just a fictional casino, it's every relationship where love becomes control, every job that promises fulfillment but delivers only exploitation, every dream that transforms into obsession that destroys the dreamer, every situation where you're told you should be grateful for a cage because at least you're safe. It's about recognizing when protection becomes imprisonment, when generosity becomes manipulation, when love becomes something that suffocates rather than sustains. And it's about learning to walk away from situations that promise everything but cost more than everything is worth. The wasteland is full of factions offering salvation. The NCR's bureaucratic order, Caesar's totalitarian clarity, House's autocratic efficiency, Yes Man's anarchic freedom. Each one promises that if you'll just accept their vision, the Mojave can be saved. Dead Money responds, every promised salvation is a trap. Every vision that requires your submission is a collar. Every leader who promises they'll protect you is building a casino you won't be able to leave. The only salvation is recognizing when you need to let go of the promise and walk away with less than you were offered, but more than you'd have kept if you'd stayed. That's a bleak message for a video game. It's also honest in ways that most games refuse to be. Chapter 9. The Ghosts We All Carry. There's a moment in Dead Money that most players experience but few discuss. The return to the Mojave feels different afterward. You're walking through Freeside or the Strip or some nameless stretch of desert, and you notice that NCR troopers wear collars. Metaphorical ones, made from duty and orders and the pressure to hold territory that's bleeding them dry. The Legion's troops wear collars made from Caesar's philosophy and the belief that individual suffering doesn't matter if it serves the greater purpose. House's Securitrons wear collars made from programming they can't deviate from even when circumstances demand adaptation. Everyone in the Mojave is wearing a collar. The Sierra Madre just made yours visible. The game's main quest becomes recontextualized. You're choosing which collar to wear permanently. NCR collar means accepting bureaucracy's weight. Legion collar means accepting brutality as virtue. House collar means accepting that one man's vision matters more than everyone else's autonomy. Independent Vegas collar means accepting the weight of every consequence from your choices. There's no option without a collar. There's no faction without a trap. There's no ending where you walk away free because the Mojave itself is a Sierra Madre, a territory that promises wealth and power and meaning while slowly poisoning everyone who fights over it. The difference is that after Dead Money, you recognize the collar. You feel its weight even when others don't. You know what happens to people who convince themselves the collar isn't really a collar. It's just necessary equipment for the mission. You've seen what ghost people look like, and you've started recognizing their living equivalents. The NCR trooper who's been in the Mojave for 3 years, who doesn't remember why holding this territory matters, who stays because leaving would mean admitting those 3 years were wasted. That's a ghost person still walking, still performing their role, still trapped in the routine that's killed everything human inside them. The legionnaire who's witnessed atrocities and committed atrocities and can't acknowledge them as atrocities because acknowledgement would break the identity. That's the only thing preventing complete psychological collapse. That's a ghost person who hasn't realized they died in the fighting pits years ago. The prospector who's spent months searching for a legendary cache who's broke and starving and still searching because finding the cash is the only thing that would justify the months already spent. That's a ghost person shambling through the wasteland looking for treasure that might not exist. And you, the courier, shot in the head, brought back from death, now playing kingmaker in a war you didn't start and can't really win. You're carrying the platinum chip like it's gold bars from the Sierra Madre, convinced it means something, unable to let go even though every faction you could deliver it to will just trap you in their vision. Dead money whispers that maybe the only winning move is to walk away from the entire war, not choose NCR or Legion or House or Independence. Just leave. Let the Mojave burn or save itself without you. Stop being the protagonist of a story that's just going to trap whoever wins, but you can't. Same reason you couldn't leave the Sierra Madre's gold behind. Same reason Sinclair couldn't abandon the casino. Same reason Vera couldn't refuse Sinclair's gifts. Same reason Dean couldn't accept that he'd lost. Because walking away means admitting that everything you've survived, everyone you've lost, all the choices you've made, it was all for nothing. It didn't build toward meaning. It was just suffering without purpose, weight without destination. So you keep walking toward the dam, keep choosing sides, keep believing that there's a right choice, a good ending, a resolution that will justify the weight you've been carrying since Good Springs. And the Sierra Madre's radio signal keeps broadcasting Vera's voice, promising you can begin again, insisting the hardest part is letting go, offering salvation to anyone desperate enough to follow it. You don't follow it again. Once was enough. But you understand why others do, because the alternative, accepting that there's no hidden treasure, no secret good ending, no reward for perseverance beyond the perseverance itself, that's harder than dying with a collar around your neck. That's Dead Money's final lesson, the one that echoes longest after the credits. We all build Sierra Madres in our minds, relationships we can't leave, jobs that define us, identities we've invested too much in to abandon, dreams that became prisons, loves that became suffocation, promises that became collars, and we tell ourselves the same lies Sinclair told himself. This is protection, this is devotion, this is love. We ignore the beeping collar warnings. We rationalize the toxic air as temporary discomfort. We convince ourselves the treasure at the end will justify everything we endured reaching it. Sometimes we die before the realization hits. Sometimes we become ghost people, still walking through routines that lost their meaning years ago. Sometimes we escape, but return for just one more attempt, just one more try, convinced this time we'll figure out how to carry the weight. The lucky ones learn to let go. They walk away from the vault with less than they wanted, but enough to survive. They accept that deserving something doesn't mean claiming it. They recognize that the hardest strength isn't holding on, it's releasing your grip.